Members of the House, please be seated.
Will the House come to order? Mr. Clerk.
Aloha and good morning. Today's invocation will be delivered by Representative Greg Takayama. Will the members who wish to participate please rise?
"50 years ago this month, our 35th President, John F. Kennedy, was struck down by an assassin's bullets. But he still speaks to us today through a book in which he described the pressures of serving in elected office. He wrote that lawyers, businessmen, teachers, doctors all face difficult personal decisions involving their integrity, but only those in public office face them in the glare of the spotlight. He said politicians face three kinds of pressure. The first, to be liked. The second, to be re-elected. And the third and most significant, the pressure to serve constituents. Kennedy wrote that sometimes public opinion will conflict with public interest, and that we as elected officials may have to decide at which point and on what issue we will risk our careers and defy the angry power of the very constituents who control our future. I read his book, Profiles in Courage, many years ago, and I reread it just recently because I find it so relevant to us here today. Kennedy wrote that when we face conflicting interests, we must place first the responsibility we owe not to our political party or even to our constituents, but to our individual conscience. He wrote that voters selected us because they had confidence in our judgment and our ability to exercise that judgment from a position where we could determine what were their own best interests. He said following our conscience may mean the loss of friends, fortune, contentment, even public esteem, but each person must decide what course to follow. To find the courage to make this difficult decision, each of us must look into our own soul. Kennedy wrote, "A man does what he must, in spite of personal consequences, in spite of obstacles and dangers and pressures, and that is the basis of all human morality." Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Aquino, Ms. Awana, Ms. Bellotti, Mr. Brower, Ms. Cabanilla, Mr. Cachola, Ms. Carroll,
Excused.
Mr. Choi,
Excused.
Mr. Kaufman, Mr. Cullen, Ms. Evans, Mr. Fale, Ms. Fukumoto, Ms. Hanohano, Ms. Har, Mr. Hashem, Ms. Ichiyama, Mr. Ng,
Excused.
Mr. Ito, Mr. Johansson, Ms. Jordan, Mr. Kawakami, Mr. Kobayashi, Mr. Lee, Ms. Lowen, Ms. Luke, Ms. Matsumoto, Mr. McDermott, Mr. McKelvey, Ms. Morikawa, Mr. Nakashima, Mr. Nishimoto, Mr. Ono, Mr. Onishi, Mr. Oshiro,
Excused.
Mr. Rhodes, Mr. Saiki, Mr. Say, Mr. Suki, Mr. Takai, Mr. Takayama, Mr. Takumi, Ms. Thielen. Mr. Tokioka. Mr. Tsuji. Mr. Ward. Mr. Woodson. Ms. Woolley. Mr. Yamane. Mr. Yamashita. Mr. Speaker.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, 47 members are present, 4 are excused.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Reading of the Journal, Representative Cabanilla.
Mr. Speaker, may this matter be deferred.
So ordered. Thank you, Representative. Mr. Clerk, are there any messages from the Governor?
Mr. Speaker, there are none.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, are there any Senate communications?
Mr. Speaker, there are none.
Thank you. Members, are there any introductions?
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognize 3 former members of the House of Representatives. First is Representative Heather Juni. Next is former Representative Blake Oshiro. And last but not least, former Representative Jackie Young, who served as Vice Speaker of the House.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative Tokioka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The other day, I tried to introduce someone who walked out when we were in that process, but she's back now, and I see her standing over there. So on behalf of Rep. Kawakami, because he used to stay at her house with her son as they were little kids growing up, he wanted to give you a big aloha too. So everyone, please help us welcome Annette Odo to the Capitol. Thank you for being here, Annette.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have 2 short introductions. The first is 2 good friends, Jun Shimokawa and Karen Ginoza, both past presidents of the Hawaii State Teachers Association, here somewhere in the crowd. But if we can just welcome them to the House chambers. Oh, there they are. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce folks who have put in as much time and effort as we have throughout this whole process, including the 50-some-odd hours of hearing, and that is the folks behind Capitol TV who does the broadcast for all our proceedings that are broadcast statewide. And I'd like to ask to insert the names of those folks into the journal, and that is Glenn Booth, Conrado Bush, Zoe Tanaka, Kiyahi Renaud, Darrow Hand, Don Honda, and closed captioning by Sharon Muchipa.
So ordered, Representative.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ono.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to represent a good friend, a good man, Pastor Max Fowler of Kakaku Christian Fellowship. Please stand and be recognized.
Thank you, Representative. Further introductions, members. Representative Awana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to introduce my friends and family from the west side of Oahu, Pastor Alan Cardenas, Pastor Jay and Jerry Amina from Ark of Safety. Please stand. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd also be remiss because everyone is here, and I know that they've waited long hours to enter the gallery for and against this measure. And we from the Waianae side and the leeward side of the island have our aloha spirit, and we'd like to share our aloha to all of you. So if you can all please stand in our gratitude for you being here today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative. Members, further introductions. Representative Fale.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce someone whose family is a very important part of our community out in the Waihole, Waikane area. I know his mom and dad very well. It's good to see him here. He's a youth pastor, and he's my Fijian brother. We used to play rugby together over at Kapiolani Park. If Pastor Atama will rise and be recognized.
Thank you, Representative. Further introductions, members? Any further introductions this morning? If not, members, recess, subject to the call of the chair. Recess.
Majority members, caucus please, and please bring your bill digest.
Just go. Hi, my name is Dean Hamer. I'm number 3028, and I support SB1. During these hearings, there's been a lot of discussion about the question of whether being gay is a choice or whether it's an immutable trait. And I'm here to offer the committee the current view of the scientific community on this particular question. I do so as a Harvard PhD molecular biologist and Chief Emeritus of Gene Structure and Regulation at the National Institutes of Health, where I published over 100 peer-reviewed papers and 3 books on this topic. Scientists like me think about sexual orientation not as a lifestyle, but as a phenotype, an observable set of properties that varies between individuals. We determine the sources of this variation through quantitative twin studies and molecular genetic mapping. The results of such studies are unambiguous. Genes are the single most important factor in determining a person's sexual orientation and outweigh all known shared environmental factors. Furthermore, sexual orientation is associated with 2 specific regions of the human genome, P20 to Q22 on chromosome 8 and Q28 on chromosome X. A recent Society of Human Genetics study dramatically confirmed these links with odds ratio of greater than 10,000 to 1. During these hearings, Representative McDermott claimed that being gay couldn't possibly be genetic because he said that only 5% of gay twins are concordant and no one's found the associated DNA. Both those statements are simply incorrect. The concordance rate is 10 times higher than that, and at least 2 specific loci have now been mapped and replicated. Taken together, these findings lead the scientific community to conclude that sexual orientation is a deeply ingrained, innate trait with strong genetic and biological roots. So gay people no more choose their sexual orientation than do heterosexual people. It's part of all of our makeup. I hope that factual summary is useful to your deliberations, and I thank you, and I'll be glad to answer questions.
Thank you. Next up,
Hi.
Representative Thielen, followed by Representative McDermott.
Thank you, Chair. I believe a scientist, physician, and quite a few different titles, if you don't mind coming back up. Did you submit written testimony?
Yes, I did submit written testimony, and I've also emailed testimony to Representative Lee and other members regarding the science.
And what is your number on there so I could go hunt that down?
My official number is 302.
No. Your number of testimony, or testifying.
It's 3028, but I'll have to check if that has the scientific portion of the testimony, because I actually wasn't going to testify on the issue of marriage until I heard some of the nonsense that was I heard over Alelo, so I came in.
Could you put your conclusion in layman's terms?
Yes, I could.
Okay,
Being gay isn't a choice.
Go ahead.
Being gay is inborn.
I'm
just
sorry,
that simple.
say that again, I can't hear you.
Being gay isn't a choice.
Okay.
It's just a part of people's makeup. It's not a choice. It's not a choice any more than being straight is not a choice. People don't choose to be straight. Suddenly, they just wake up when they're 11 years old and go, oh my God, I really like girls. Just like lesbians wake up when they're 11 years old and say, oh my gosh, I really like girls too. It's just that simple. And there's been a vast amount of psychological research and of anthropological research which supports this. So it's not just the molecular biology or the hard science. It's all of the human sciences that support the idea that people have their sexual orientation, whether it's gay or straight or in between, because they're channeled, because it's born in, because that's the way that they are meant to be.
Okay.
That's the simple explanation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Representative McDermott.
Doc, can you come back, please? You didn't think you were getting off that easy. Come on now. You're a molecular biologist?
Yes, I'm a molecular biologist.
You have a PhD?
I have a PhD from Harvard Medical School.
In molecular biology?
In biological chemistry, yep.
Okay. I have reviewed a lot of studies, and would you admit that there are also a voluminous amount of studies that have the opposite view of what you're proposing forward, and they're also peer-reviewed?
There are not any studies from molecular biologists that counter this idea. In fact, there is a vast literature on sexual orientation and its molecular biology, not only in humans, but also in a variety of different species, which has not only shown that it's genetic, but have actually identified the specific genes, the nucleotide sequences, exactly what they do, and how they affect the brain. And it's not really that complicated. For example, in Drosophila melanogaster, there's a single master switch.
I'm asking the questions, okay? You had
so the answer is yes. There's a huge literature about the genetics of sexual
Would you also
orientation.
agree there's a huge literature in the opposite direction?
Not by molecular biologists.
Well, maybe.
I disagree. Do you have any citations?
Doctors, I got
from molecular
8
biology?
in front of me. I got some up in my office. Now, I'm not a molecular biologist, but please then explain the Spartans, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the men at the time of Alexander the Great, where homosexuality was rampant and the norm. Did they all have a genetic deviation?
Oh dear, you're confusing molecular science with ancient history. Those are different fields, actually. And so let me explain as molecular biologists, let me explain.
So,
I can get a professor down at the university that shows that elephants
I don't
fly.
think this is going to go anywhere, so perhaps I should.
So we'll answer the question. You made fun of me, but you didn't answer the question. Please explain the rampant homosexuality in the Spartans, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, and the men at the time of the Alexander the Great. Clearly, if it's genetic, there must have been a genetic mutation somewhere along the line. Correct?
Now, let me say first of all that the anthropological studies that I've read have stated that because there were differing conditions, there was different acceptance and different reporting of homosexual activity. But in all societies that have ever been studied, there is a certain level of homosexual activity. It's really just a question of whether that is glorified and looked up to, or whether it is so put down and so discouraged that people are even afraid to report it.
Well,
and let me further add that
I'm asking the question.
No,
I'm asking.
no.
Yes.
I want to tell
The Spartans, it was the norm. The
Can
norm.
you folks both stop? Okay, let me just stop you folks. I think it's been well testified to that there was homosexuality in various cultures, so I don't think, this needs to be either proven or disproven at the time. So Representative McDermott, if you can continue to question in a cordial way and testify, or if you can answer in a cordial way. I know it's really late for everybody, but we want to keep cordiality.
I have no more questions.
Okay, Representative Wale. Oh, somebody else? Oh, Representative Kobayashi. No, Representative Wale.
Question for the doctor.
Okay.
And you're going to have to talk slowly to me. I got my education in a third world country, so you're going to have to slow down a little bit for me there, doctor. So what you're saying is that we can take any genetic sample and determine whether that child is going to be homosexual or not?
Absolutely not. No, that's incorrect. That is a misconstruing of what I said, and that is not the way it works. And let me just say that similarly, we know that, for example, there are components for
well, doctor, here, that's what I'm saying. You have to slow down here. I definitely didn't go to Harvard.
Yeah.
Okay? That's why you have to slow down. And you're talking to people like the good representative from Kailua said, you have to talk in layman's terms, okay? What I just heard you say is that you can look at genetic material and say that you can identify this is exactly where homosexuality is located on the human genome, okay? That's what I heard. So what that means to me is that if I submitted genetic material to you of another human being, let's say that's just born, let's say a brand new baby. I can submit it to you, doctor, and you can tell me whether this child is homosexual or not.
I'm sorry, but that is absolutely incorrect. And if you understood
what
I said,
thank you,
doctor.
Okay, any other questions? Representative Lowen?
I had another question, but for a different testifier.
Okay, anybody for this testifier? Representative Kobayashi?
Could you explain two numbers that you gave? One was a rate of 10,000 to 1, and the other one was 10 times. I didn't quite get what those referred to.
Okay, and I apologize. Trying to condense all of this research into 2 minutes is difficult, so I will explain those two numbers. 10,000 to 1 are the odds in favor of linkage at these two loci, chromosome 8 and X chromosome. 10,000 to 1 odds in favor of means there's only a 1 out of 10,000 chance that the results that were observed were just by chance. So scientists never say, I've shown or I've proven that there's a linkage. We always give you a probability. When you get to 1 out of 10,000, it's good. I mean, if you had money, you should bet on it. No question about that. The other number I cited, tenfold the existing rate, yes, was, and the question about identical twins, the rate of concordance for sexual orientation. In other words, if one of a pair of twins is gay, what's the probability that the other one will be? It's a little bit over 50%. That's 10 times higher than just the average chance of being gay. Normally people have about a 5% chance of being gay. If your twin is gay and you have the same DNA, it's much higher, 10-fold higher. And it's kind of by that rough logic that we figure out the extent of genetic loading for a trait like sexual orientation. I hope that's a clear explanation. It's all in my book, Living with Our Genes, or my book, Science of Desire.
Okay, thank you for your
advertising.
Promotion of your book. Okay, thank you. Representative Lowen, was that for the same testifier? Different one, same testifier?
Yes.
Okay, can you come back? We have additional question.
I'm sorry, Doctor. Thank you, Chair. There's been, I mean, obviously the question of choice has been at the crux of this entire discussion. And I think there's been some concession on one side that, yes, there is some kind of spectrum that some people are more likely to be attracted to the same sex. It's just a matter of fighting that feeling and repenting. What is your feelings about, there's been some ex-gay testifiers. What is your feeling about gay convert to straight conversion? Is that legitimate?
Yeah. Well, as I've discussed, the underlying trait of sexual orientation, that is attraction, clearly has an innate basis. But the way that people actually behave is, of course, under their own control. And people can behave in a way that, you know, is opposite than the way they feel. And this is the basis for the idea of conversion. I've read a great deal of the historical and current literature on this. And it's quite remarkable. It started in the 1940s with electroshock, with castration, with all types of shock therapy, and with lobotomy. Thousands of gay veterans were lobotomized because they showed homosexual behavior in the United States military, and it's really quite drastic. There's no evidence that any of that therapy has done anything except to mess up these people's lives. And it's for this reason that now all of the professional societies, American Society of Psychiatry, American Association of Psychology, etc., have discouraged this type of so-called reparative therapy. And I think that there are some districts that have actually made it illegal. So I don't think that it doesn't seem to work, and people certainly have tried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Well, Representative Lowen, you had a question for somebody else? Or same person?
Thank you. So we were starting to get into the question of if there's other studies out there. So can you explain the process? I mean, when you're doing a study like this, what kind of literature review you do?
So when we started our study, even before we began collecting data, it was reviewed at the NIH for scientific accuracy. And then because it was such a controversial study, it was reviewed all the way up to the White House, actually, which was then the Bush White House, not very radical. And they approved it because the head of the National Institute said this is a good scientific study. So the design was considered to be sound. After the results were published, then quite a few other scientists also tried to do the same thing or to extend the results. There were 6 replication studies that have been done so far. 5 of them found very similar results and supported it. 1 of them found different results, a study from Canada. And the way that scientists analyze that data then is to combine all the data and do a meta-analysis. And when that's done, it points to the results that I told you about. So the whole idea of science is that no one study proves anything. It just serves as the basis for further studies, and those either get the same results or they get different results. So that's the sort of scientific process.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Fale, you had a question for
Mr. Wilson, please.
Next, please.
Aloha, representatives. We come from the island of Molokai, and we're one ohana. We are 3 sisters here.
Can you just give your name and your number, please?
Okay. My name is Ruth Manu, and my number is 4185.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
And my sister Judy Caparita is 4171. And my sister Joanna is 4190. And we truly want to thank you folks for making a way for us to come here and testify. But before we do that, we're going to sing a song. Okay?
I'm sorry, just be aware that if this is how you want to spend your 2 minutes, that's fine. You all get 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. Thank you very much.
Praise the Lord! Our God is an awesome God. We came here to tell you that Molokai is unique. Hawaii is unique. We're separated by water, but we call these home. Because of God's word, it don't matter what men say, we know that God is in control. And we will, Molokai says, our community says, no. My Ohana says no. And I'm here to tell every one of you, no. Because our Jesus says so. He loves us. And if you don't know him, you better get to know him. Because one day we're going to be judged. Know that we're going to be judged. We are accountable. You sit there over there, you do your job in righteousness. You got to be porno. It's not what you think, oh, the other person is telling me. No. You do what God tells you. Because every one of you breathe because of him. If you, every time you get up and you breathe, you think that is God. Because he said he made man in his own image. And he owns you, and he's the boss. I needed to share that with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Aloha. Well, that's what's her 2 minutes. I get 2 minutes, right?
Yeah, you still got 3 of you. If you'd like to sing another song, that would be fine too.
All right. Oh, they want another song. Okay. Yes, our King. All things. He is the Lord of Lords. His name is Jesus. 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 Whoa. He is the King. He is the King.
Okay. Thank you so much. You have a good trip back.
Thank you. Love you guys.
Who's next? Who's next? Who's next? Come on up.
Aloha, my name is Suzanne Young, number 2701, also as Suzanne King. I am Native Hawaiian. My partner Tambri and I have been together for 32 years. We have a 13-year-old daughter, and we're married in 2009 in Massachusetts. People say this issue can wait till 2014. It cannot. Every day without marriage equality, my family and many others are unprotected and not treated equally. I cover Tambri and Shiler's medical through my company. When the Supreme Court ruled in June and the IRS confirmed our Massachusetts marriage, I received over $1,600 in pre-tax savings this year alone returned to me. This benefit was not only a financial benefit to me, but my company as well benefited from this. Unfortunately, other LGBT families cannot receive this benefit because Hawaii only has civil unions, which provide state benefits, not federal benefits. Passing SB1 this year ensures that families and employers get this benefit retroactively applied to January 1. Our family's been here every day listening to all these people criticize our family and our daughter. It's not kind, it's not Christian, it's cruel, and it's hurtful. It's also shameful that people who have come before you, who are attorneys, educators, and experts, are providing incorrect information. What I said in line to the people that were in front of us was that Native Hawaiians have nothing to worry about with regard to 572-C. It is absolutely incorrect that it will transfer Native Hawaiian ethnicity to children of same-sex couples. KSBE, DHHL, and OHA all require ethnicity to be verified through biological, blood, or natural parents. This information is readily available for the public on the websites. You have been misled. We need our federal rights. Please pass SB1. Mahalo.
Thank you very much. Next, please.
Aloha legislators. My name is Shyler Young and I am 13 years old. My parents are Tambri and Suzanne Young. My moms have been together for 32 years.
Sorry, can you tell us your number, please?
Oh, my number is 2700.
Thank you.
They weren't granted the same benefits that are given to every other straight married couple. Our family had to pay $1,500 to the government this year. If you multiply that by the 4 years that I've been here with my moms fighting for our rights, that's $6,000. So what if their kids will have to learn and accepted in schools? Families like mine are already in our schools. Many people say that I will be weird, but I am a member of the Honor Society, have a 4.0 GPA, and my first film was in the Hawaii International Film Festival and is being considered for the New York Film Festival. It is the government's business to ensure our family is treated the same as all other governments, and that we are provided equal rights under the law as required by the U.S. Constitution. And so I ask you to support families like mine and to vote to pass marriage equality bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Aloha legislators. My name is Tambri Young. I am the wife of Suzanne and mother of Shiler. Some of you know me, and I'm sure many of you know where I
give us your number, please?
2699.
Thank you.
Many of you know that, of course, I stand in strong support for this measure for families like mine and many others in the Hawaiian community, and I am Hawaiian. that won't come down here and testify for fear of a lot of what is being said about Hawaiians and about where this bill is coming from. It's important to look at, and I know that many of you legislators will and are looking at the bill and realize that it is about civil rights and the rights that need to be afforded to us under the Constitution. Yes, getting marriage here would allow us to get those federal benefits. Unfortunately, some of the religious exemptions aren't going to satisfy the religious community. But I think if you really read the bill, it allows them the right to not have to solemnize same-sex marriage within their church and not have to recognize that, but let's support those religious institutions that do allow for same-sex marriage. In closing, what I want to say is that I want to say thank you for those of you that will rise in support of this measure, this bill, because you can see how important and how families like mine need this. I also want to say thank you for those of you that will rise in support, but with reservations. I understand the pressure that you're under, but I know that you understand the rule and the laws. And I also want to thank those who will stand in strong or opposition to this bill, because you've given us all of us, the opportunity to express how we feel about this. Please support SB1 for my family. Thank you.
Very much. Excuse me. Next, please.
Okay, Representative Brower.
If I can ask a question of Suzanne King and Tambry Young, whoever feels more qualified to answer the question, but if both of you can come forward. We could probably satisfy thousands of testifiers in the last few days and avoid a lot of conflict if we didn't call this union of a same-sex couple a marriage. And if we kept the biblical tradition for marriage between a man and a woman and a marriage for a same-sex couple, if we called it, for lack of a better name, like I can't believe it's not marriage. Can you tell me why it's so important for you, if we could avoid the federal government question, why it needs to be called marriage? Why can't it be called Civil Unions 2.0?
Well, it can't be called anything but marriage for the federal benefit purpose.
But if we avoided the federal question, does it still need to be called marriage in your mind?
Well, I believe marriage, the idea of marriage is a state of mind for each individual person to be married, to feel what they feel about being married. You know, whether or not you tell me I'm married to Suzanne, we believe we are married. Unfortunately, the word marriage does trigger the benefits. So, yes, we are married. I can call myself married. I feel I'm married to Suzanne. I guess if you ask everybody what the meaning is about marriage, we probably would say the same thing.
Then is it about, I mean, it could be hashtag marriage, but is it about marriage for the federal benefits, or do you believe the Hawaii gay community needs to have it called marriage?
For Suzanne and I, it is about the trigger of the federal benefits. That is exactly what it is. For the community and for all the people of Hawaii, it should be called marriage. You know, if marriage, I mean, for the people that, you know, we bump into at the doctor's office, at the bank, all these things, when you say you're married, the perception that everyone has, or the understanding of what that married means, it's not misunderstood. If we are called civil union, it causes them to start to think, okay, now civil unions, what does that mean? That means they get some of these and some of those. When you come up and you say you're married, that automatically triggers an idea or a perception by people of what that entails.
Okay, for interest of time, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Representative Ward for another testifier. Senator Bellotti.
If Suzanne Young and Tambry Young and Charlotte could come forward, please. And it's going to be very brief, and it's along these lines of beneficiaries. You know, I do want folks to know out there that we are listening and that this issue about Native Hawaiian rights has actually been very disconcerting to me. So I kind of want to unpack some of the, I think misconceptions that have been out there about this Section 572 C, which is with respect to presumptions of parentage. So I just want to understand. The three main programs for Native Hawaiian beneficiaries that we're concerned with are KSBE, DHHL, and OHA, correct? And all three of those Native Hawaiian programs, in order to become a beneficiary, I've tried to look up and see what their steps are. You guys have been through that as a Native Hawaiian family. What are the things that you have to prove to be able to benefit, to get to be beneficiaries of these programs?
With Kamehameha, they have the Ho'oulu Hawaiian Data Center. It's required that you show biological. So Shyler applied for Kamehameha. She tested on Saturday for 9th grade. What we had to put in there was Tambri as the biological, and even though I'm Hawaiian, I'm a co-parent adoption on the birth certificate, but that has no bearing for the Kamehameha application. It was biological for Tambri, and we're registered through the Ho'oulu Hawaiian Data Center, which goes through the verification.
For DHHL and OHA, have you registered for any of those, and do you know what the criteria are to be able to qualify as a beneficiary for those programs?
We registered with OHA to do the ancestry for the Kauai Noa and all of the other Kanai'olavalu. And with all of those, it is blood, biological, natural parent. Those are the things. You can find it on the website. It's not hard. All of their criteria is there. None of it is just purely what is on your birth certificate.
And the same for DHHL because of the blood quantum
Blood
qualification.
quantum.
Thank
It's
you.
very specific on DHHL that it's blood.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, Representative Har?
Madam Chair, point of clarification. At 9:49, you actually hit the gavel and you said we are adjourned. So I just want to make sure, for the record, are we actually back in? What exactly are we doing with the hearing? Are these people who are testifying, is their testimony part of the record?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so you were literally, when you say you were joking,
Yeah,
you were
I was
not,
actually
you did not,
joking.
in fact, adjourn the hearing.
Right.
Okay.
And
So-
my apologies to Representative Ward. That was just.
I just want to make sure for, the process. Okay,
Madam
so
Chair, it
we're,
was a good
it was a
April Fool.
recess. It was a recess.
Accepted.
You meant to say recess. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
I didn't even mean to say recess. I just wanted to throw my gavel at him. And it accidentally hit the block. Okay. Okay, so can we move on? Thank you, Representative Park, for that clarification.
Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So if, in your mind, you said marriage is a civil right. So I am enfranchised with a civil right if we pass this law for same-sex marriage. I'm enfranchised. He's enfranchised. Miss Carroll, who was
My name is Stephen Levinson. My number is 2661.
Thank you.
I speak in strong support of SB1. I've submitted written testimony. I'm not going to repeat it. I was intending to speak to a particular matter, but the subject of legislative intent in the context of the 1998 constitutional amendment has obviously come to the fore and is a matter of great interest to the committees, and I am happy to speak to that subject if the committees would like me to, and answer any questions.
As long as your testimony is within 2 minutes.
All right. The proposed constitutional amendment was contained in House Bill 117, the 1997 legislative session. Section 1 of HB 117 sets out the legislature's intent regarding the constitutional amendment clearly and unambiguously. As a bit of background, courts are called upon all the time to determine legislative intent. The rules of statutory construction provide that if the legislation is clear and unambiguous, it expresses the legislature's intent without the need to look to anything extrinsic, and in fact looking to anything extrinsic becomes inappropriate. In the face of ambiguity, the courts first look to any express statements of legislative intent that there may be. If there are none, courts then look to legislative committee reports to reflect the intent of the legislature. If intent is not reflected there, courts look elsewhere, including to the remarks of individual members from the floor, which
Thank you, Justice Levinson.
all right. Again, I'm available to answer questions later if anyone wants to ask them.
Thank you. Okay, next up, the members. Any questions? Oh, Representative McDermott.
Justice Levinson, can you come up, sir? Thank you, sir, for being here, and thank you for your service to our state.
Thank you, Representative.
You are a formidable and brilliant legal mind, and it's with great trepidation that I even ask you a question.
No need for trepidation.
Be kind. My first question would be the recent Supreme Court decisions. We've been, as a matter of fact, when the governor came down to the minority caucus, he said to us, because of the recent Supreme Court decisions, we've got to have a special session. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that was the big thing. And so
in the audience, in order to maintain order and decorum in this chamber, Chair respectfully asks that the audience refrain from any outbursts or demonstrations which may disrupt the deliberations and proceedings on the floor. Any disruption of these proceedings will be reviewed as in violation of House rules and the Hawaii state law. Continued outbursts will get you removed from the gallery. So I humbly ask that you allow us to do our job. Thank you very much. Members, we are on third reading. Representative Cabanilla.
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules of the House in order to consider a certain Senate bill for third reading by consent calendar.
Thank you. Representative Thielen.
Sorry. I second the motion, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative Thielen. It's been moved in second. This is a voice vote. All those who support this motion.
Speaker,
we're in the middle of the vote, and I've already called the voice vote, so we're going to go through with it. I apologize. I did not recognize you before. This is a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed say no. The motion is carried. Representative Oshiro.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to raise an objection of waiving the rules.
Okay, recess. Members, subject to the call of the chair, recess.
people out there, the truck driver, the clerk at Long's, the one who only reads the headline, DOMA struck down, and go back to work, busy raising kids and their families. That's all they read. Did the United States Supreme Court, in either of the two decisions, specifically enumerate a constitutional right for same-sex marriage for citizens across the United States?
No.
Okay. I would like to ask you, in the Baird decision, the conflict between the 14th and First Amendments, was that ever addressed?
No.
Okay, very good. This is quick. I expected much more. Okay. One of the questions I asked yesterday was the Department of Education. And you were a judge, so you still are, you're retired. If we pass same-sex marriage, and the Dick and Jane books, and I'm using that because both you and I are a little long in the tooth, the Dick and Jane books that we grew up with, they have different names now, but they have a mom and a dad, and et cetera, et cetera. If a homosexual couple, after this is passed and becomes law of the land, brings a lawsuit and says, hey, there are no homosexual couples represented in any of the curriculum, in any specifically speech.
I was there too.
Okay, good. And he told us somewhat cryptically, but he told us, and this was in the throes of all this controversy. He said, and I'm paraphrasing because it's been a long time and I don't remember the exact words, but Representative Ward was there and he might be able to chime in. At the end of the day, the legislature has the trump card to solve these controversies, and that is the constitutional amendment. And do you recall that?
I do.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for being so kind with your time. I'm very grateful for you, sir, and thank you for not beating me up.
Representative Johansson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here, Justice Levinson. We spent a great deal of time as a committee yesterday talking to the Attorney General, and much of a resonant theme that came up is what the judiciary might or might not do, and so I think it's helpful to have a Supreme Court justice also be able to chime in. And my question will be a bit similar to what I asked the Attorney General yesterday, and it has to do with a section in the bill that pertains to religious exemptions, allowing a refusal to solemnize being predicated on what does or does not constitute profit for religious organizations. And it stems specifically from page 6, lines 14 through 18, where the present bill explicates certain conditions that don't constitute a profit. And what I wanted to ask you as a former Supreme Court justice is, when you have a law that explicates some conditions that in this case do not constitute the for-profit, which is the precursor to defining whether.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Senate Bill number 1, House Draft 1, as listed on page 1, pass third reading.
Thank you. Representative Cabanilla.
Mr. Speaker, I second that motion.
Speaker. Thank you. Representative Oshiro.
Short recess, please.
Short recess. Okay. Recess subject to the call of the chair. Will the House come to order? Any discussion? Representative McDermott.
Mr. Speaker, I have a floor amendment to offer.
Mr. Clerk, have copies of the floor amendment been distributed to the members?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, copies of floor amendment number 14 have been distributed.
Representative McDermott.
Mr. Speaker, I move for the adoption of the floor amendment.
Floor amendment number 14, is it seconded? Representative Ward.
Speaker, I second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Representative McDermott.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so very much. I realize that this may be a little redundant, and we are in the last legs of our long journey, Mr. Speaker. I have tried everything I can to give the majority an opportunity not to move forward with this measure that I believe, the underlying measure, unconstitutional, which I'll get into when we speak on the main measure. But the measure before us is the task force similar to the one that was passed earlier this year. However, it's different in the fact that it adds the director of DBED in charge of the task force, vice the head of the law school, and it adds an additional member of the clergy. This is a more balanced approach, I think. I think it takes into consideration the folks who have been here outside for the past 2 weeks sharing their voice with us. And it gives us an opportunity to do something that's constitutional or do something other than an overtly unconstitutional act. So I have spoken to leadership before the session, and I wanted to find a third way. This is a third way. It's a positive, affirmative action. It is movement forward. It is a solution. It is not just carping and being negative. I am offering a way out, if you will, to do something. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I ask for the humble consideration of the body.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Fale.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support.
In support, please proceed of the support of the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, for a moment, if we could all take a look at the gallery. For a moment, if we could take a look outside the gallery into the entry area into this chamber. We've seen what we're doing to the people of Hawaii, Mr. Speaker. You take a look. We have a red line that's dividing the community, a red line that's dividing families and the entire state as a whole, Mr. Speaker. And through the process of this division, we have not allowed other members, neighbor islands, to have the opportunity to speak, to have their opportunity to hear what this is all about, and to either accept or reject this, Mr. Speaker, given the truncated special session that the governor has handed down to us. I rise in support because we need to do what this amendment would do, as it talks about this issue being the most contentious issue of this generation. Therefore, the legislature further finds that rather than rushing to a decision on the issue of same-sex marriage in a truncated special session, it would be more prudent to convene a task force to study the potential impacts of same-sex marriage in Hawaii before taking any legislative action. The purpose of this act is to create a task force to study the social, economic, and religious impacts of legalizing same-sex marriage in Hawaii. This body passed a measure to that effect, Mr. Speaker, and it was never given an opportunity to do what it was supposed to do. I remember the meeting that we had with the Attorney General and the Governor, and in that meeting, Mr. Speaker, the first words out of the Attorney General's mouth was that we needed to pass this so that people from out of state could come and get married here because it would be good for the economy of the state of Hawaii. Those were the first words out of his mouth, Mr. Speaker. Now, my job is to represent people who live in the state of Hawaii. I'm not going to pass laws here so that it will be a matter of convenience or good for somebody outside of the state of Hawaii. My first priority has to be the people here. And if this measure, which we have seen the physical manifestations of the division that it's putting us through, why not make the study? Why not take an opportunity to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing, and not so that we can put extra money in the pocket of the state coffers, Mr. Speaker? That's the wrong reason to do this. Growing up here, my parents said, one of the last reasons you should do something is for $1. And if that's what's being thrown out to us, well, we're going to get $270 million or so. Is this worth $270 million, Mr. Speaker? the divisions with family, with communities, and in the state, is that worth $270 million? Is that the number one reason why we're doing this? As the Attorney General threw out to us in the meeting that we had. Is the relationship I have with my brothers, my sisters, is that worth $500 billion? The answer is no, Mr. Speaker. The answer is no. And until we know exactly what those impacts are going to be, I say it is wrong to push this measure through without knowing what it's going to do. And the reason, the overall reason is we need to get people benefits for this coming tax season. That's why we have to do it now. Is it worth it? Is this worth it? If this body feels that the wedges we are driving through the hearts of our communities, Mr. Speaker, for the extra money so that people can get some extra dollars this next legislative tax season, or so that the coffers can get a little more money over the economic benefits, I submit to you, Mr. Speaker, that's one of the worst reasons to rush this measure. And for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, this amendment is something that the body should consider to make sure that we understand exactly what it is we're doing so we can remove the pain, we can remove the wedges, and act in the best interests of the people in the state as a whole. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion,
Mr.
Representative
Speaker?
Ward, followed by Representative Brower. Representative Ward, followed by Representative Brower.
Speaker, I rise in support.
In support, please proceed.
Speaker, I made a confession during the 55 hours of testimony that I came out of academia, and as a freshman, I was very, very disappointed in the way we do business here. We don't make decisions on the basis of data. We don't make decisions on the basis of evidence. We don't make decisions on the basis of facts. It's more opinion. It's more case, a corollary from here.
Representative Ward, I apologize. I do not.
You're not catching my drift?
I'm catching your drift, but you cannot infer the thought process of our committee members on judiciary or finance. That's your, if you recognize that or believe that, that's your own thought.
Okay.
But you cannot infer their intent or their thought process.
In Indonesian, they say, justru karena itu, precisely because of what you said, is why we need this resolution. It says, let's keep score on what is going on with same-sex marriage in Hawaii. In that testimony, the tax department didn't even know how to quantify what civil unions have cost. That's loosey-goosey, Mr. Speaker. This resolution says let's do it. Let's be evidence-based. As I was interrupted in the Finance Committee, you've interrupted me in the Finance Judiciary hearing. I was trying to commend a nurse who was doing, quote, evidence-based practices. And I said, I envy you for doing evidence-based practices. That's what we need to do, Speaker. And if you can prove me otherwise, I'm not making a condemning notion of this body, but I'm telling you the way we do business, it's too loosey-goosey. It's not evidence-based. This resolution gives us some factual, empirical, evidence-based to say, here's what we've done, here's what the scores look like. That's all it is, Mr. Speaker, nothing more.
You're directly on point. I agree. You're directly on point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Ward. Thank you very much. Representative Brower.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The representative from Laie talked about...
Representative Brower, in support or in opposition of the floor amendment?
In opposition, Mr. Speaker.
Opposition,
Thank you.
please proceed.
Previously, we heard about division that's being created. And I'd ask members to think, who is creating this division? Who's the roadblock to inclusion on the underlying bill? Who is keeping someone else from receiving a privilege? Who is creating the division on this issue? And who is trying to create unity, inclusion, and equality? Mr. Speaker, let the legislature vote.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative McDermott.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would like to include the remarks from the gentleman from Hawaii Kai for his sage wisdom, and the representative from Laie for his passion. And it's been remarkable to watch him develop as an orator. I'm very proud of him. He is a bright star.
Your request is so ordered, Representative.
Thank you so much. Just briefly, who's causing the division? We are, Mr. Speaker. We are. This is a remedy to an unconstitutional provision we are pushing out. The power invested in this body comes from who, Mr. Speaker? The people. The people in 1998 spoke. And I'll get to that when we speak to the main bill, Mr. Speaker. But this is a positive alternative solution. We are causing the division. We are causing it because we're taking an action. They feel that they were tricked, a bait and switch. We are causing it, not them. They're reacting because they think they got shafted. That's why there's so much angst and anger out there, clearly. So, Mr. Speaker, this resolution is a third way. We can take a positive, affirmative action with this document and say that we did something, but we didn't do anything bad or unconstitutional. Make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, this body created the division. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you very much, Representative.
Mr.
Representative
Speaker?
Fale, a second time, followed by Representative Har. I'm sorry, actually, I apologize, Representative Fale. I'm going to recognize Representative Har because she has not spoke on this measure, or I'm sorry, the floor amendment yet. Representative Har.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the floor amendment.
In support of the floor amendment, please
Mr.
proceed.
Speaker, I rise in support of the floor amendment because I think there's one issue here that was really overlooked during the 57-plus hours of testimony. The issue was the economic impact of what same-sex marriage would mean to the state of Hawaii. Now, we had Mr. LaCroix talk about what the impact, the positive impact could be, but we also had Dr. Min Pang, also a Chinese economist from the University of Hawaii, who also talked about the negative impact same-sex marriage could have to our economy. Mr. Speaker and members, the fact of the matter is this. Our economy is built on tourism. And even a 1% decline in tourism from the Asia market will have a significant impact on our general fund and will offset any gains that were proposed by Mr. LaCroix. For those reasons, Mr. Speaker, this is a very timely floor amendment. We must understand the economic impact. And quite frankly, I'm no longer a member of the Finance Committee, but I was quite surprised that the Finance Chair and many of the Finance members overlooked and just pretty much seemed to ignore Dr. Min Pan's...
Again, Representative
Well,
Har,
again, Mr.
I don't
Mr.
know
Speaker,
what the finance chair and the
Mr.
members
Speaker,
overlooked.
the fact of the matter
You can't
is we
infer
have
it.
in fact moved forward with this bill. And so all I can say is based on moving forward with the bill, we have not done a thorough analysis on what the negative impacts could be. And again, even a 1% decrease from the Asian market, tourism market, will have a significant impact on our tourism economy, our general fund, and more importantly, will offset any of the gains that were proposed by Mr. LaCroix. For those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I support this floor amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm sorry, Representative Saiki.
Have a brief recess.
Recess.
Members of the House, please be seated.
Will the House come to order? Representative Oshiro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising in support of this floor amendment. And let me explain to you the reason why.
Please proceed in support.
You know, although my first impression that it's redundant, ill-timed, ill-conceived, it does serve the purpose of prompting my recollection that there actually should be a task force report or something similar to this before this body. I think, if I recall correctly, sometime in mid-September, there was a newspaper article in the Star Advertiser disclosing the fact that a draft of a task force report, which was convened by both the House and Senate leadership, comprised of both House and Senate members, including some of the members of the clergy, the business community, members of the advocacy groups, university professors of economy, School of Sociology at the University of Hawaii Manoa, some DPED officials and staff, and I believe the Dean of the Law School, the Richardson School of Law at the UH Manoa. I believe in that article it suggested that there was a draft report that was being circulated for approval by the task force members, and then finally publication released to the body, House and Senate members, all 76 of us. Heretofore, we have not received a copy, or I have not received a copy, but I haven't been here every day of the week, so I may have not been around to receive it. So I guess as a way of supporting this floor amendment, I also beg the question through this support, and my words herein is, where is the draft report? What happened to the draft report? And can we see the draft report before we vote on this floor amendment? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative Thielen.
Thank you.
First time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in response to the representative from
Representative Thielen.
I'm sorry. I'm in opposition to the amendment.
Please proceed in opposition.
Thank you. In response to the representatives from Laie, Kapolei, and Wahiawa, this is not about money. This is about equal rights. And Mr. Speaker, let the legislature vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Fale, second time.
Mr. Speaker, I was in that meeting with the Attorney General, and I was in that meeting with the governor. That's exactly that was told. The very first thing, number one on the list, good for Hawaii's economy, $200 and so million. That was the number. That was the underscored thing, that this was issue about federal income tax or whatever, federal benefits in regards to that, and economic beneficiary issues. So I say again, Mr. Speaker, what I was told. I can only tell you what I was told, Mr. Speaker, about what this was all about, what the special session was about, and the urgency of calling it had to do with going into next year's tax season. I would say, Mr. Speaker, in answer to the question of who has caused the division, the governor has caused the division, Mr. Speaker. He has put this on this body, on this state, in our communities, without thinking through this and what the impacts were. We knew that we're still waiting for that report on the study of what same-sex marriage would do here in the state of Hawaii. But once again, Mr. Speaker, we voted on SB1 HD1 on Wednesday. That report didn't even come onto our desk till we were already here in session. Not a single member of this body was afforded the opportunity to take that measure back to their community and run it by them to see how they felt about it. Not a single representative in this body, Mr. Speaker, was afforded that opportunity to go back to the community and say, is this okay? Is this all right? We asked for that recess. We said, please allow us, give us 5 days to arrange town halls throughout our community so that we can talk to the families, to the people who are going to have to live under this. I've been getting emails from everybody who have been criticizing me on my position on this issue, and I said, I wasn't even given the opportunity to come and ask you and your family how you felt about this. And that's wrong, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't allowed the opportunity. That's my job, is to be a conduit between myself and the district that I represent. And I wasn't even able to talk to those who were for and against it to see what their position was on SB1 HD1. And that's wrong. And my position is, even more important than letting the legislature vote, is let the people vote, Mr. Speaker. Let the people vote. All power in the state of Hawaii is vested in the people of this state. And given the tight situation and the divisions that exist this day...
Representative Matsumoto, would you yield your time to Representative Fale?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I yield my time.
Thank you very much.
Given the importance, thank you very much. Given the importance of this issue and what we are physically seeing manifested today on what it's doing, Mr. Speaker, on matters of this significance, of this importance, we need to go back to the authority that gives us the power that we have in this legislature, Mr. Speaker, which is the people of Hawaii. I trust them. We all should trust them. Whenever we get into binds, whenever I have a rift with my brother, my mom and dad would tell me it doesn't matter who's right. The bonds that you have as family are more important than anything else on the face of this earth. The bonds we have as people of the state of Hawaii is more important than any economic benefit that may be derived from this measure. And we've heard that there may not be any economic benefit to this. On the whole, it may be a negative, and we need to know that. But more importantly, far and above any of that, are the bonds that bind us together as people, Mr. Speaker, and this measure has caused more division than it's worth to our families, to our communities, and this state. And once again, Mr. Speaker, don't let this legislature vote, let the people vote.
Thank you very much, Representative. Any further discussion? Representative Ward, a second time.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I feel compelled as a member of the Finance Committee and one who cried for empiricism when I hear my colleague from Kapolei talking about the numbers. I feel compelled to respond because what the perspective I bring is a little bit different than most people. I mentioned earlier in another speech a few days ago, half of my relatives are Muslims. There's 300 million Muslims in the area that she spoke of. 300 million Muslims are a pretty viable number. And I should mention that I was speaking of to the Dante Carpenter of Malaysia, the head of the coalition, who loves Obama, by the way, but he cannot figure out what is this bent with him and the other states going towards same-sex marriage. The Muslim nations of the world are very concerned about what they see happening. So to say that the 250 million of the Indonesian population is going to come to Hawaii, which is now emerging as a really big middle class, plus the other 1 billion from China. And Mr. Speaker, we heard those who were just off the boat, if you will. They were very new immigrants. They said, in China, I can't say these things, but in America, thank God I can speak out. Same-sex marriage is antithetical to our culture. It shouldn't pass, et cetera, et cetera. Those representing even a minuscule amount of the 1.3, now 1.4 billion in China is going to be a formidable negative reaction. So again, for the sake of empiricism and keeping our eyes open, this measure has merit, and that's why I spoke twice on it. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much,
Mr.
Representative.
Speaker?
Representative Luke.
Thank you very much. In opposition,
Opposition,
and I take great
please
offense
proceed.
to the accusation made by the representative from Kapolei. And the financial issues, although I don't know if it's relevant to this bill, was extensively debated, and especially thanks to the representative from Hawaii Kai, questioned various testifiers about the financial impact. So with that, I call for the question.
Members, we are going to take a voice vote. There has been no request for a roll call. We are going to take a voice vote on the floor amendment number 14. Members, vote aye if you're in favor of floor amendment number 14. Vote no if you're opposed to floor amendment 14. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed say no. The floor amendment has failed. Representative.
Mr. Speaker, can we have a
Representative
brief
Saiki.
recess?
Recess. Will the House come to order? Representative Ward.
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment to offer.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, have copies of floor amendment number 15 been distributed to the members?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, copies of floor amendment number 15 have been distributed.
Thank you very much. Representative Ward for the motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move for the adoption of this floor amendment that would allow an opt-out for teachers and parents for their children.
Thank you very much. Representative McDermott.
I second the motion, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the proposed floor amendment number 15? Representative Ward.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment.
In support of the amendment, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, this body has been accused of not listening to the people. This body has been accused of having an inability to listen to particularly one group in one gender. I call them the mama bears. Those were the women who time after time shouted out, in addition to protect our churches, protect our keiki. We're in Hawaii. Aloha and keiki are almost sacred concepts. So on behalf of the mama bears, I want to repeat what I said the other day. I want to be very clear of what they said to us and very clear of what this bill is about. This bill is about equality, but people contend it's not about education. Because what we've learned from other places, Mr. Speaker, is that after same-sex marriage comes the curriculum revolution. Massachusetts, Canada, et cetera, and they say, well, that's not true. It's not going to happen here. And I said yesterday, which, by the way, we didn't have on television, and we said it was Olalo's fault. Speaker, you know the Capitol TV is in the purview of you and the Speaker, and the reason why the people of Hawaii didn't hear that, I know I'm meandering, but I want the people to know they didn't hear yesterday about these debates, and some of you are going to complain because I'm going to be repetitive, but the people were blocked from hearing the debate yesterday because you guys didn't allow it to happen. Okay, in continuation, sir, in continuation, I said you don't have to go to the moon to prove it's there. We don't have to go to Massachusetts to see their curriculum. We don't have to go to Canada to see their curriculum. We have to look to see that it's going to happen, if it's happened in these other places, unless we are a unique planetary exception to this. My point, Speaker, is that evidence was not believed. They said this is not an educational bill. We'll take that up later. But the mama bears are crying out. I said the mama bears are demanding, protect our kids. And lo and behold, what has popped up? I want my brother from Laie to help me pass this thing out, because this is the first onslaught, if you will. The first indication, the first maybe tip of an iceberg, of which is an empirical-based thing. And please don't shut me down.
Point of order. Could we have a recess, please?
A recess, Speaker.
Recess subject to the call of the chair.
According to Mason's rules, when someone has the floor...
Will the House come to order? Representative Ward.
Mr. Speaker, may I continue?
Yes, please continue, Representative.
Mr. Speaker, I think I ended somewhere about you don't have to go to the moon to prove it's there.
Correct.
We have some evidence of an emerging curriculum, something that's being tested, something whose purpose, if you would look at, I believe it's page 2, and it's good curriculum, except it needs some nuancing in the interpretation of it, some clarification. The Pono Choices, as it is called, is a 10-module curriculum that provides young adolescents, and this is particularly the 7th grade, 12 to 13, when you reach puberty. That's the class that it's in now. It gives them knowledge, attitudes, skills that are necessary to reduce the risk of sexually transmitted diseases or sexually transmitted infections, STIs, and pregnancy. And it goes on in detail. The proponents of the developers of this are the Berkeley Policy Associates, Hawaii Department of Education, Planned Parenthood of Hawaii, and Alolike. If my colleagues would turn to page, I believe it's page 3, where it says what schools are being impacted, or let's say treated. This is where the experience of this curriculum that probably not too many people are aware of. It's Aliumanu Middle School, Highlands Intermediate, Hilo Intermediate, Niihau Intermediate, Kapolei Intermediate. You guys can read it all. And the charter schools, Hawaii Academy of Arts, Sciences, Science, Waters of Life, etc., etc. The point is, Mr. Speaker, this thing is pretty well circulated, and it's on a pilot basis, which is good. They're going to basically measure the effects of it, etc. Now, this is probably good because kids need to know about sex. No question about it whatsoever. What may be questionable and what may be presumptive about it is when we go to the page 11. Everybody please go to page 11. Page 11 is when it actually meets at the student level when there are things called worksheets. The worksheets on the Pono Choices has a Pono Relationships worksheet. If you look at the worksheet, it has 3 different scenarios. This is the case study method. The first 2 case studies are heterosexual and one is homosexual. No big deal.
Representative Johansson, will you yield your time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I yield
Thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you, Representative Johansson. No big deal. 2 heterosexual relationships, 1 homosexual. Well, okay, it's appearing, but then the category of the heterosexual relationships is categorized as, quote, unhealthy. Heterosexual relationships, unhealthy. It just happens that the homosexual relationship is called healthy. Is that a bias? Well, does that say anything? Well, maybe not much. But then, Mr. Speaker, and this is not a smoking gun, but when you get to the other worksheets, which I call YAMLs, I've been training entrepreneurs, and we always have YAMLs. We've done about 3,000 graduates in 10 countries. And YAML is the sacred thing, yesterday's most important learning. The equivalent of a YAML is a reflection square which was brought into the classroom here. Where it was, I have no idea. The learning of the day was as follows. Oral sex, mouth on genitals. Vaginal sex, penis enters vagina. This is the student saying what they learned that day. 3, anal sex, penis enters anus. Mr. Speaker, this is, again, it's not heavy, it's not a smoking gun, but it shows that something regarding what's going on in Massachusetts, what's going on in Canada, seems to be emerging, seems to be evolving, seems to be present in this curriculum. And it's something that the mother bearers say, hey guys, okay, same-sex marriage, okay, but let's not have it go into the school system. And I know somebody will stand up and say, well, look, we have an opt-out policy. There's some controversial things about some parents who have opted out of this. I'm not going to go into those details. They're doing it with the DOE probably now. But, Mr. Speaker, we've got to give the mama bears some breathing room. Ideally, this gives the body an opportunity to amend this bill and say, look, don't worry about it. We got your churches covered. We got your kids covered. Let's just get on with it. And if the vote maintains the same as it is, and without any amendments, these people are going to be very angry, Mr. Speaker. They're going to say, you listened to us, but you didn't do anything about it. So I just bring that curriculum as new information that I added the other day to my floor speech from where otherwise we amend, where teachers can opt out, parents can opt out, and this is something that I heard very loud and very clear from the people of Hawaii. Mr. Speaker, I think we are compelled to pay attention. Otherwise, as some call it, a sleeping giant, mother bears who are looking after their cubs are mother bears looking after the cubs. Now, I didn't even mention the papa bears yet. I didn't mention the Tanari Ma'afalas and the others with great intensity want to make sure that what we're going to do is Pono, even though that's what they've called this thing. We got to do what's Pono. We got to unite these groups up here. We got to live with each other, people. We've got to get beyond this, I'm for, I'm against, you're this, you're that. We got to unite people, Speaker. We as leaders have to project this unity. We have to get legislation that doesn't tie those groups up there in court, or shouting at each other, or fighting at each other, or making bullying remarks to each other, or bullying their kids in school. Speaker, we got to address this issue on behalf of the Mama Bears. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative McDermott.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, to continue on to what my colleague was saying.
In support of the floor amendment.
In support of the floor amendment, but I will vote against the underlying measure, the bill, if it comes to the floor. Mr. Speaker, page 11, there are 3 scenarios as he discussed, and one of the 3 is a homosexual relationship. That would lead us to believe that 33% of the population, as it's being presented, are actually people who engage in homosexual behavior. Scenario 1 is unhealthy. It's a heterosexual behavior. It's described as unhealthy. Scenario number 2 is a male-on-male homosexual behavior, which is described as, quote-unquote, healthy by the student who took the class. So I'm not going to make any judgments, because who am I to judge? But I would refer the members to the National Institutes of Health to review the statistics on male-on-male sex and make their own determination if it is a healthy activity. Scenario number 3, the relationship is a heterosexual relationship, and it is considered abusive. So we seem to have a inculcation of our youth here. Now, granted, it's a pilot project, and I believe the parents were made aware of it prior. But this is the nose of the camel under the tent. And Mr. Speaker, we do have a current policy. Well, many people said it's not the curriculum. Well, this is a pilot project for future curriculum, and it misrepresents the behavior, in my view, and the quantitative analysis of the representation. But Mr. Speaker, we have a current policy in place on controversial issues. And much to the members' chagrin, I need to refer back to my Dick and Jane books. Now, they're not called Dick and Jane books anymore, but they're used as illustrations to amplify the curriculum contained therein. Mom and Dad getting in a car, spot the dog. The names and faces have changed, but the principles are the same, Mr. Speaker. Parents need protection because it takes one individual who's adopted a child to file a lawsuit, a homosexual couple to file a lawsuit and say, you know, you don't have any illustrations of my family in any of these books. By not having our family in those books at the 3rd grade, the 4th grade, the 5th grade, the 6th grade, you are creating an environment where my child feels prejudiced. My child feels excluded. It's a hostile learning environment for my child. It takes one judge, just one, and I think, Mr. Speaker, we can find one here in Honolulu, who would say, you're absolutely right, and strike down the controversial issues policy and mandate that this type of curriculum is in our schools, and there is no opt-out. And if you go to the principal and say, I'd like to opt out, you will not be called by the principal, but you will be perceived in the community as a hater, bigot, homophobe. There's no opportunity to have an intellectual disagreement on this issue, Mr. Speaker. None. You're hater, bigot, homophobe, or ignorant. Those are the options you have. Trust me, I know they've been shared with me. So, Mr. Speaker, current curriculum doesn't have it, but here's a pilot project. The camel's nose is now under the tent. It's coming. If we don't institute protections, parents will lose their rights to this newly created civil right. Mr. Speaker, it takes one judge to do this. One judge. And anyone to say that it won't happen. I told you before, and I will tell you again, sir, I will bet my house, that within 10 years, this will be the case if this bill passes. There's no doubt about it, Mr. Speaker, none. In California, they actually mandate it, Senate Bill 48, they have to change all their books. They haven't done it yet because they don't have any money. But in their curriculum, they have to emphasize, if, say, a composer like Mozart, I don't know if he was gay, but if he was gay, it has to be part of the curriculum. Oh, he wrote these 9 wonderful symphonies, and by the way, he was gay, a homosexual male, and he made wonderful contributions. They actually want to publicize his private behavior. It's a private behavior, Mr. Speaker. It's not an immutable, benign genetic characteristic. Again, it is not an immutable, benign genetic characteristic. It's a private behavior. So, Mr. Speaker, the camel's nose is under the tent. The parents need protection. And I urge my members to support this for the parents, for the children. The evidence, it's right here. Please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion, members? Representative Takumi.
Mr. Speaker, I oppose this.
Oppose the floor amendment. Please proceed
just
in
two
opposition.
Comments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just 2 comments before I get into the underlying amendment. Just a quick clarification about the judicial process in the state of Hawaii, and in fact in every state. If one judge in Honolulu, I guess, says that schools have to teach the homosexual agenda, my last reading of the judicial system in our country and in our state is that can be appealed, but I could be wrong. Second point is that I just hope, because the representative from Hawaii made mention that although this resolution of this amendment was introduced a few days ago, we weren't on Olelo. And now we're on Olelo, so the people of Hawaii can see what the proceedings are about. I hope this doesn't set a precedent that unless it's on Olelo, amendments will be introduced so that people can see it even more. That's never been the policy of the House, and I hope that doesn't become the policy of the House. Now let me get to the underlying amendment. And I hate to repeat myself, but I will, that the department does have a policy, 2210.1, that very clearly states that at any time a school will teach a controversial subject, and I know it was brought up in one of the hearings, that if this bill should pass and it's legal, then it's normal, then it's not controversial. Mr. Speaker, let me remind you, abortion, whether some people like it or not, is legal in the state of Hawaii. It's legal, but it's still controversial. Birth control. Last time I looked, anyone can go to a drugstore and purchase the birth control of their choice. It's legal, even though some people believe that birth control contradicts their faith. It's controversial. And thereby, when that topic comes up in the public schools, parents have the right to opt out. The other reason why I think this floor amendment is problematic is because it's very narrowly constructed. It doesn't bring up what if a teacher or a parent or a student believes that evolution is not true. I believe in creationism. Can they opt out because there's no law, there's no statute? Mr. Speaker, again, the policy does allow a parent to opt out if and when a school teaches about evolution. Another reason is that the superintendent sent a response because obviously this, although it's not embedded in the underlying bill that we're going to be discussing later today, but she did want to clarify the department's policy. And let me just read to you what she said. The Department of Education confirms that it has a clear process for providing parents with notice when a controversial issue will be taught in a class. Parents and legal guardians are afforded the opportunity to opt out their children from such lessons. There are no plans to change that process. To further clarify, an issue may still be considered controversial based on multiple factors, including community and family opinions, whether a matter may be quote-unquote legal or not. I made reference to that with the issue of abortion. And lastly, what's problematic about this amendment is I feel for the colleagues on the floor that even though they support this, if they support this amendment and there's a House Draft 2, the language in here on page 9, line 5 to 8, legalizes same-gender marriages. So if you are opposed to that, but support this, and you vote for this, unfortunately, you are also supporting all the parts of this bill, which does legalize same-gender marriage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative McDermott, second time.
Speaker, yes. Thank you. We're making progress, Speaker.
Still in opposition.
Still in opposition.
Still in support of the
Still in
amendment.
support of the amendment, but I'm going to vote against the underlying bill. But since my colleague informed me, you won't need my vote anyway because you already got 30, so that's good. But, Mr. Speaker, it's to help you out. Mr. Speaker, we've got acknowledgement. It can be appealed. For the first 2 weeks of this, it'll never happen, it'll never happen, it'll never happen. You're crazy. It can be appealed, Mr. Speaker. An acknowledgement that it is possible to happen. In fact, 30 years ago, the very idea of same-sex marriage was crazy. Today, we're on the brink of legalizing it. Mr. Speaker, it can be appealed. Now, I don't have much faith in the governor, to be honest with you, Mr. Speaker, pulling out all the stops, getting that legal team fired up, and providing the protections we're seeking. Just don't have that warm fuzzy, Mr. Speaker, about that. I just don't have it. And with regard to the introduction of amendments and speaking, and although some may seem repetitive, Mr. Speaker, sir, you've never accused me of brevity or lack of loquaciousness, have you, sir, on second or third reading, or my friend from Hawaii Kai. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we are consistent. Second reading, third reading, we've always done it. So we're not playing to the cameras. But, Mr. Speaker, the folks at home watching this need to know that your members, who you send here, are voting down parent protections. They see the curriculum, they brush it off. Well, it's never going to happen. Here's the camel's nose under the tent. Well, it only takes a lawsuit. It'll never happen. Well, you can appeal it. We can rely on the governor to appeal it. We're getting pretty close to an admission this is going to happen. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Representative.
Mr.
Further
Speaker?
discussion? Representative Brower.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One, from reading the answers of the
In
student...
support or in opposition?
In
of the floor
opposition,
amendment?
Mr. Speaker.
Opposition, please proceed.
One, I have my questions that the student may have been gay who filled out the survey, but written on page 11, previous speakers said that a heterosexual couple was checked off as unhealthy, but when you read the example, the reason the student checked unhealthy is because Alexander bought earrings for Mia as a way to have sex with her, and they were about to have unprotected sex, and the student listed this relationship as unhealthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Oshiro, followed by Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be rising to speak against this floor amendment.
Against the floor amendment, please proceed.
Yeah, against the floor amendment, because it concerns me that it still contains some defective language that is still seemingly taken out of the Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1. Let me just draw your attention to the provisions in 7. Let's go to page number. Let's go to. It's all over the place here. Okay. Let's go to page. Let's go to page 5 first of all. Page 5 on lines 11 to 16, section 572.c, reliance on federal law. Any law of the state that refers to or adopts or relies upon federal law shall apply to all marriages recognized under the laws of the state, as if federal law recognizes such marriage in the same manner as the laws of the state, so that all marriages receive equal treatment. The concern that's raised there is whether or not we are delegating our state authority over the jurisdiction of our marital laws and all related matters pertaining to marriage, property, trust, custody, support, etc. And that's a concern I raised. It's still in this. It's in this bill right here. The refusal language also contains so-called protection for the religious believers who do not choose to solemnize a marriage. I've turned your attention to page number 6, lines 7 to 9. Marriage shall be immune from any fine, penalty, injunction, administrative proceeding, or any other legal or administrative liability for the failure or refusal. Again, I raised that concern, and it seems to reflect the same language in Senate Bill 1, House Draft 1. What it fails to do, although it appears to provide protection from any fine, penalty, injunction, administrative proceeding, or other legal administrative liability, what it fails to do, Mr. Speaker, is to provide protection from any civil claim, cause of action, or state action that might cause the fine, penalty, injunction. In other words, this section here deals with any foreseeable penalties or imposition of any fines or other adverse consequences, but it does nothing to forbade or prevent a claim or cause of action from arising both from a government agency, the government itself through state action, and or commission or administration, public or private. And that's replete through this in other areas where you have the so-called protections or immunities contained in this draft. Let's go down the bill further to Section 7 on page 12 and 13. This is on page 13 again. This deals with the issues of solemnizations to join persons in civil unions. The same defect here again. It deals with the so-called sanctions elements of the penalty or violation, but it is nothing about the cause of action, claim, state action, again, to enforce the laws. It appears again on page 16, top. Again, it says this is under the section religious organizations, exemption under certain circumstances. Top of page 16, lines 3 to 4, shall be immune from any fine, penalty, injunction, administrative proceeding, or any other legal or administrative liability to failure or refusal. Again, it misses the key words that's contained within the whole Connecticut law and most other laws dealing with this issue of the civil claim or cause of action or state action that could come against the violator of these sections. So those are some of the areas on that. I also have grave concerns, Mr. Speaker, on page 19 of this draft here. Section 12, and this is a question that's come up before in other proceedings. The Department of Health may, in its discretion, make any changes that it deems necessary to internal procedures or forms to aid in the implementation of this act. A concern that's been raised is whether or not this is an unlawful delegation of authority to a department that lacks sufficient guidelines and restrictions or limitations upon the authority that the Department of Health has, and not to go to the normal challenges of rule
Representative
promulgation.
Takayama, will you yield your time?
Mr. Speaker, I yield my time.
Representative Oana, thank you.
Thank you, Representative from Nanakuli. Yeah. The problem here is that this might be a way of eviscerating the normal channels of rule propagation through the public hearing process under Chapter 91. This gives the full measure and complete discretion to the Department of Health. I think it also might bypass the system that we've set up years ago, whereby the rules or proposed rules will go through the small business advisory, group that looks at any rules that may affect or have no effect upon the businesses. So it's for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, that I object to this draft. Well, there's one more also, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry. This is section, I believe, section 9. I think that also is in the, section 10 in this. Section 10 in this bill, page 17. It's the jurisdiction of the family court that's expanded to give unique rights to same-sex couples who had their marriage solemnized in Hawaii but may not be currently domiciled or residents in Hawaii, to access our family courts and have their marriage annulled, dissolved, or even a separation order pronounced upon that within the requisite domiciliary or residency requirements that we normally afford and require for family court petitioners in this matter. There's some serious constitutional questions that have been raised by the expert from the, BYU University who came in, Professor Wardell, who spoke against the probable constitutional problems or even due process concerns raised by this provision here. So for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I strongly object to this floor amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion, members?
Speaker.
Representative Saiki?
Can we have a short recess?
Short recess. Recess, members.
Share opinions, and I think the good member from Pearl City needs to look at this historic 55 hours of testimony, followed by all the things that the representatives were saying were never heard by the public. This body has a historic responsibility to set the record. We had 5 days of TV, and then we had 0. The gentleman, the good gentleman from Pearl City must be equating this to a GT tax bill or something like that.
Representative Ward, please, again, we cannot infer
But he
upon
implied
our
that I'm
members.
playing this to the camera to tell the people of Hawaii that, oh, we're on camera, we want to talk and listen. That is incorrect. That is personally offensive to me. When we go on record, the people of Hawaii should know. And the historic debate for 11 hours, not 1 hour of that was shown by television. And Mr. Speaker, he incorrectly said it was Olelo. It's not Olelo. It's Capital TV, which you and the Speaker control. It's $75,000 a year. We pay them, and you told them not to do it or something. I'm imputing motive. I'm sorry. Okay. But the people did not see it. That's the first point. My second point.
Point of order.
Let me finish
Representative
my
Ward, hold
second
on. I need
point
to
of
hear
order.
this point of order.
Second point.
That statement was incorrect. Move to strike.
I want evidence if it's incorrect.
Give a recess, please.
Recess.
Where at 10 a.m. the legislative session started for the third reading of the marriage equality bill, same-sex marriage. And the first bunch of, they have segregated the people with the various points of view here. Thank you, thank you. These are the people who are against the initiative. I'm going to walk through by. We have a lot of people here. There are also, you can see sausage food. Walk across here so we can get this little island that I'm on is a very popular spot for demonstrations and protests. And this looks like the demarcation point. And these are the 4 people. Okay.
With the House come to order, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me clarify what just took place. 55 hours of testimony from the public was seen by the public. 11 hours of debating that testimony of those 5 days was not seen by the love looking at you. Speaker, you're so good looking, so mature, my eyes just naturally go to you.
Speaker's
Except
correct.
sitting behind you is the chair
Pursuant to
of
the House
judiciary.
rules, Representative Ward, you've got to be facing the Speaker.
Okay,
Now,
realignment.
you can kind of glance at
realignment.
him, but look at me.
Okay, I got you. You're in my crosshairs now. The point is this. Where that committee report is absent in the voluminous references, and I'm going to use the Eva Beach colloquial curriculum, the Dick and Jane, the countless questions that he asked, to the point where people were laughing. There was nothing at all in the committee report about what this amendment is about in terms of curriculum.
Mr. Speaker, I yield my time.
Yes, Representative Fukumoto, thank you very much.
And the notion that, as I called them, the mama bears, that the women of Hawaii wanted to be concerned about their children. Nothing in the committee report does that. And Judge Levinson said, these are the things that are tertiary in a court case. First you take what the bill says, then you take, it's secondary. The secondary evidence is what the committee report says, and then tertiary is what we small guys on the floor have to say about it. Therefore, I would suggest if we really want to represent what the people of Hawaii said for 5 days on TV, we have to mention in that committee report that some parents are concerned about this issue, which it looks as though people may be voting down. So, Speaker, let's be honest. Let's let the record reflect, other than very few people will probably go and look at the 6 or 8 inch record of the Journal to find out what was said. So let it be on the record that all of the things that this amendment is about is conspicuously absent in the official committee report. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Fale.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment.
Please proceed.
I actually referred to the good representative from Wahiawa's remarks in regards to the amendment. He has demonstrated that even this amendment has issues with it, Mr. Speaker, and that underlines the problems that we have when we rush legislation. And given the short amount of time that we were allowed to respond to this measure was introduced on the 22nd of October. Special session started on the 28th. Mr. Speaker, we were supposed to go and talk to experts. We were supposed to talk to the related government agencies in regards to this issue. I tried to get a hold of them. I believe that was a Wednesday. Have you ever tried to get an appointment within a day or two of any of these departments, the Department of Health, Department of Education, all these? Mr. Speaker, it takes more than 6 days to get a sit-down. Mr. Speaker, it takes more than 6 days for people to clear their schedule, and that's including a weekend. That's including a weekend. Special session started on Monday.
Representative Fale, please continue, but let's focus on the floor amendment number 15
Right.
for us.
So this floor amendment, Mr. Speaker, is an attempt to do what we were not allowed to do and address a number of the issues that were raised with the House draft that came out of that hearing. Because, remember, Mr. Speaker, not a single person in this body, before they voted on this measure, was allowed to go back to their community and say, what do you think of the amendments that the House made? We sat here while those amendments were the committee report wasn't even complete at 10 o'clock when we came into session on Wednesday. So again, not a single representative in this building had the opportunity to take this measure to the community to get feedback on it. And so we have before us a river of amendments to deal with the 55 hours of concerns that were raised. So, Mr. Speaker, not a single amendment from this body as a whole has been made. And so, Mr. Speaker, at least this amendment tries to deal with one of the issues that has been raised. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative Saiki.
Mr. Speaker, I call for the question. Please allow members to submit written comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question has been called. Members, if you would like to submit written comments into the journal, either in support or in opposition of the floor amendment, Chair will allow you to do so. Members, we're going to take a voice vote If you vote aye, you're in favor of the floor amendment. If you vote no, you oppose the floor amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed say no. The floor amendment has failed. Representative Ward.
Mr. Speaker, I have an additional floor amendment.
Mr. Clerk, have copies of floor amendment number 16 been distributed to the members?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, copies of floor amendment number 16 have been distributed.
Thank you very much. Representative Ward, for the motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move for the adoption of the floor amendment that exempts small businesses and people of conscience.
Thank you very much. Representative McDermott.
Mr. Speaker, I second the motion.
Thank you very much. Any discussion on proposed floor amendment number 16, Representative Ward?
Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment.
In support, please proceed.
Speaker, if we remember the concern about church protections and then children protections, the third is probably the most forgotten member of the faith community. That's the small business person, the individual of conscience. This amendment speaks directly to them by allowing their genuinely felt religious beliefs to exempt them from doing things which otherwise are against their religion. Speaker, I said earlier, half of my relatives are Muslims. If this bill said from now on it's okay to eat pork, or you should eat pork, I mean, we can pass the law, but the conscience of these individuals will be seared. It will be where the state now becomes the church religion. It'll be where the sanction of the church will rest with the state. Mr. Speaker, I know that this is unprecedented, but look, this is Hawaii. We can do better than those other 15 states. They never give this the way. And I have in my district empirical evidence, again, the empirical term, a bed and breakfast who has this very issue tied up in court. You know how much it costs to go to court to fight these issues or to settle these issues, to adjudicate these issues? Mr. Speaker, some of the churches, some of the small businesses, some of these cake makers and florists and photographers, they're going to be hurting. Why can we not consider them? That's what this amendment appeals to. And for those who are genuinely members with a faith community that in their conscience, you know, we have conscientious objectors from one faith community. They don't have to go into the military. We have people in the military that can't fire weapons, etc. We as Americans have always allowed your conscience to be very important. And not as a way of putting it onto the equality issue, but to genuinely acknowledge that this is one nation under God. This is where 80% of people believe in God. And there's probably a number of people who believe in God sincerely enough to get out of the business, which they've done already on the mainland. Speaker, we can do better. This is an amendment that will help and give those members of the faith community with conscience to do their work at the same time, keep their duty to God and their country. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative McDermott.
I yield to Representative Rhodes.
Okay, Representative Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. You know, having listened to all the testimony over the last week and a half.
Representative Rhodes, in support or not
against the floor amendment.
Please proceed.
Sorry. You know, I think people are forgetting. There may be some people who are forgetting that the public accommodations law is specifically designed to protect those of religious belief. If you look at the list of protected classes, you have race, sex, sexual orientation, color, ancestry, disability, and religion. And religion obviously it's a choice. You know, you get to choose your own religion. It's not something that you're born with that you can't do anything about. You know, it makes you wonder why religion is on the list. Well, the reason religion is on the list is because people with minority religious views have been persecuted and discriminated against for time immemorial. I think ever since there's been religion, there's been discrimination against religious people. And I don't think it's a good idea to erode the protections in the public accommodations law for religious people. And that's why I oppose this floor amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative McDermott.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, religious protections are guaranteed to us by the First Amendment. So important that our founding fathers put them in there because they came from all parts of the world.
Representative McDermott, in
Sport, yeah, I'm sorry about
Please
that.
proceed, no problem.
All parts of the world to escape the tyranny of religious persecution. It was so important that it's our First Amendment, freedom of press, speech, religion. And it's so important it was enshrined in that document. Now what we're doing is creating a new civil right. Now, as Justice Levinson testified before the committee, there is no constitutional right to same-sex marriage. As Justice Levinson testified, there is no fundamental right. But we believe we should create this new right. What's going to happen, invariably, and with all the legal scholars have said, you are going to have a constant conflict between these two rights. I go back to our friend, the photographer, Mr. Rocco from the Leeward Coast. He loves his homosexual brothers and sisters. Right now, when he gets called to play for a wedding, he makes his living as a piano player. He gets a phone call. He's very nice. He says, you know, I'm a devout Catholic. My family's been Catholic for 400 years. I appreciate what you're doing. Let me refer you to 3 or 4 folks who will do a fantastic job and probably do an even better job because, quite honestly, my heart is not in it. If someone goes out to target him because they know who he is and he doesn't do the wedding, he'll be subject to a lawsuit. At which point, a man of modest means cannot fight all the way to the United States Supreme Court. He would need some help. And he would go through years and years of litigation. And without this protection, he would be subject, I'm sure, if the pattern falls, it has in other states, to harassment. He would be smeared on the web. Don't go to this photographer, hater, bigot, homophobe, ignorant. That's what it would say. It would be a web attack. And people would steer away from that because they don't want the controversy associated with that. So, Mr. Speaker, we'll put him out of business. It's not the first time we put anyone out of business. But we'll put him out of business because we are saying this newly created civil right is more important than the First Amendment that was guaranteed to him in the United States Constitution. We are denying our faith tradition of this country. Religious freedom is so precious, Mr. Speaker. It's so precious they put it in there as the First Amendment. You cannot deny it as the heritage of our country. Maryland, how did they get their name? Maryland. That's where all the Catholics went. Pennsylvania, founded by William Penn, the Quakers, most tolerant of all the early faiths, and they had initially the largest Jewish community in the nation because of their tolerance. And I could go on and on and on. The Anglican Church in Virginia, that was a state religion. Thomas Jefferson didn't support that because they actually taxed their people to support the church. And that's where the separation of church and state came in. But each of these states had their own religion. So to deny that religion is a part of our fabric and who we are as a people is to deny reality. Now, without protections, we come against the conflict. The conflict of a sincerely held religious belief and this new civil right. This new civil right seeks, quote unquote, equality, and it seeks legitimization, which is don't ask, don't tell, marriage, but it's still not there. They need destigmatization. And the only way you can get that is through shutting down people who disagree, calling people haters, bigots. And putting in the schools. That's the only way. They're not going to get my generation. They're not going to get the other generations who are older than me. But it's my kids in school. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to protect the business guys because they'll be shut down. They won't be. This is like telling Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles they have to serve a BLT sandwich in their cafeteria. I mean, that's the equivalent, Mr. Speaker. A Jewish hospital, you got to serve a BLT sandwich. Now, I don't know if they do, or a Hasidic hospital run by devout Jewish people. You have to serve pork in your hospital because my dietary, I'm an Irish Catholic, I work there. You should have more dietary menus than I'm going to file a lawsuit. The reason this is, without these protections, Mr. Speaker, this becomes very pernicious. People undoubtedly, again, I bet my house on it, will sue to make a point and put these guys out of business, the totalitarian regime of political correctness.
Representative Fukumoto, would you yield your time?
Yes, I yield my time.
Thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you, Representative
McDermott.
Fukumoto. I appreciate that. The totalitarian regime of political correctness will come crashing down on anyone who says, hey, I respect you, I love you, you're a good dude, good person, I don't want to participate. It's against my religion. Sorry, you got to do it. We've minimized, we are saying with this passage of this bill, the religious freedom, the religious liberty that we all cherish falls by the wayside. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the emerging minority in this country are people of faith. They are the minority now. They are the one we never take seriously. In fact, Mr. Speaker, judge after judge after judge has ruled so narrowly on the lower courts with regard to religious freedom, it always has to get kicked up to the United States Supreme Court, where they can't deny the reality of what the First Amendment says. It's pretty clear. A marriage counselor who doesn't want to provide counseling to same-sex couples, a therapist. Hey, I'm not comfortable doing this. You're not going to get my best because my heart's not in it. Bang, lawsuit. You're going to go to court. And there are people who will test it because they want to shame the people of faith. You're archaic, you're knuckle draggers, you don't know what you're talking about, and we're going to put you out of business. Because we got the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission on our side, and we're going to hammer you and hammer you and hammer you. And if we don't spend you to death fighting the state with unlimited resources, we're going to smear you on the internet, we're going to picket your workplace if we can, and put you out of business. Don't believe me? Ask Mike Gabbard what happened to his sandwich shop back in the 90s, or his Whole Foods place. He had to sell it. People were picketing. He was making a good amount of money, Mr. Speaker. They would picket him. He couldn't sell any more sandwiches. He had to sell it. He lost his livelihood. Lost his livelihood. This is serious business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion, members? Representative Jordan, followed by Representative Oshiro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the good representative from EVA. As I spoke on Wednesday.
Representative Jordan, in support or in opposition of the floor
In
amendment?
support,
In support,
Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed in support.
I spoke on this on Wednesday. You know, I too remember that testifier, Mr. Rocco from the Waianae Coast. And he spoke very eloquently. In fact, we called him back up for continued discussion in the hearing. He basically said he was a pianist and he was a psychologist that practiced with couples. And he told us, yes, he's been called for ceremonies to play piano. And he has turned business away with, here's 3 other people you can ask. He understands the public accommodation law. We asked him that. And he spoke in opposition of SB1 for fear that he could be in violation. And he said, if SB1's, he could be. And I truly understood that he understood our bill and understood the public accommodation law. And this is what I was talking about on Wednesday. How do we allow people to have their own conscience based upon their freedom of religion? Now, when Mr. Rocco spoke before us, he didn't say he was just a practicing Catholic, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, living by that. He told us his family was ingrained in the Catholic Church for 400 years. How can I deny him? We have to respect that. I personally feel that our current SB1 HD1 draft does not address that. It was brought up in our hearing. We didn't have that discussion in our caucus on vetting our measure. And this is bringing up this discussion again. I clearly understand, and I'm not going to say we're rushing the procedures because everybody's telling me, no, you're wrong. When am I going to be right? The good representative from Laie said, what, 7 days we've been discussing this? 5 of those in long hearings? When are we going to discuss this? I don't think our public accommodation law can supersede our First Amendment right. Why don't we just put bright lines and define it right off the bat? Don't have individuals like Mr. Rocco come before us and say, I'm just going to close my business. When a question was posed to him in our hearings, well, Mr. Rocco, why don't you just put in your advertisement You do traditional weddings. And he felt very uncomfortable doing that. I would never ask anybody to put something on their business card, their website, or in their window to say what they're going to service or not service. So how do we protect individuals and give other individuals rights? I haven't heard that question answered yet. And no, I'm not comfortable with our public accommodation law. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Oshiro.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will be speaking against this floor amendment.
In opposition, please proceed.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's the same deficiencies that is in the previous draft regarding the really not the inauthentic or unrealistic protections for liability. Let me just speak a little bit about the direction this thing is headed. I'm looking at the language right here. It seems to be well placed along the lines of the representative of Waianae to a small business, which is 5 or fewer employees, or 5 or fewer housing units regarding housing. And this is very narrowly drafted in the context of providing goods or services that assist or promote the solemnization or celebration of any marriage or civil union, or provide counseling or other services that directly facilitate the perpetuation of any marriage or civil union. So it's both the creation of the civil union or marriage and the perpetuation or support of it. And the housing is similar, restricted just to those limited instances. But what I don't see here, and the reason why I object, is that if you're going to embark on some kind of policy like this, I think there needs to be some kind of a review into the bill itself, and that's what's missing here. I would suggest that this was to move forward. You would put maybe a 3-year sunset that was similar to what was put into House Bill number 6, where you had this kind of provision. I want to make sure people understand that what you're having here is a lack of clarity between both the liberty rights of individuals as well as the religious rights of individuals in the business place. And what Representative from Waianae spoke to is a very practical type of conundrum that we face, although it's inevitable if you look at the literature that's been published going back to 2008, same-sex marriages and religious liberties. We know it's going to occur, and I think this is a good attempt to try and prevent that. If we can somehow get articulation or clarification on what tests will be used when you have both the religion interests under the Constitution and the sex interests or gender orientation issue, how that is going to be resolved. And I've been suggesting that we resort to the Schubert test, through the creation of a separate act to protect the religious rights and balance it against the due process equal protection concerns. And again, it would be determined by a bona fide, sincere religious beliefs. And that's helpful because it's not any willy-nilly kind of religion unto itself kind of creation, but what's bona fide and what's sincere religious beliefs. It also requires that the action be substantially burden the person's ability to act on that belief. And then the burden would shift again to the government to establish that there's a compelling state interest. And number 2, that it's a least restrictive or least burdensome manner. And the reason why it's relevant for us today is when I read the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission's October 17, 2013 response to inquiries, the executive director correctly articulates the law and the standards in place today. And he states this: the state of Hawaii has a compelling state interest in eliminating discrimination in public accommodations, period. Our public accommodations law is a law of general applicability that serves a compelling state interest. The concern I have there is that it seems to adopt, maybe by reference or by that choice of words, the test that came out of the Employment Division versus Smith, 494 U.S. 872 in 1990, which I spoke about, basically that if government has a compelling state reason, that's all it needs to go and supplant and trump any religious freedoms. And I have grave concerns over that. I've asked, and I hope they would consider, and we would consider that we return to the prior Schubert-Werner line of cases where Justice Brennan wrote and suggested that we need to have a balancing of approaches when you have two important constitutional rights. Also, on a real practical note, Mr. Speaker, let's not forget that we're not just not talking about photographers or bakers or butchers or wedding planners or florists, but we're talking about a multitude of individuals and small businesses involved in the marriage ceremony today. This involves one's creative intellectual property, whether it's poetry or writing or publication or musicalization, lyricists. A whole gamut of people would fall under.
Mr. Speaker, I yield my time.
Thank you very much, Representative Awana.
Thank you, Representative from Nanakuli Ea. It seems to not be appreciated how far reaching it is. And it's a quite reasonable request. It's not going to be sanctioning any kind of things that would oppress people like me of Okinawan ancestry or me of Japanese ancestry. But really, it would provide some bright lines of understanding. And the idea behind it, and certainly there's no animus intended behind this proposal, but it's a very practical one, that over a period of 2 or 3 years, you will see, and we hope to see, a developing niche of businesses that will cater to, exclusively to, our gay brothers and sisters in the area of marital services or those kinds of events and activities. And I think that's the idea behind it. The last legislature to look at this was, I think it was the Minnesota legislature several years ago. And they went back and forth on this whole idea because they based it upon the past history of other states where you've had this conflict. And they wanted to avoid it. They didn't want to get into the situation in New Mexico right now that you have a photographer that was fined under their version of a Civil Rights Commission, and that may also prompt ultimately the higher appellate courts of the United States Supreme Court to even look at that case. But the whole idea behind it is to prevent, as much as possible, these foreseeable conflicts from arising. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I need to suggest this. This is in no way condoning any type of discrimination at all. What this does is it's a very practical approach to human nature and human custom, and as creatures of habit, we all have inclinations. So that's what it does. But it also provides an opportunity for us to do the right thing for our people, to avoid conflicts, and to address, Mr. Speaker, the fringe elements on both sides of this debate and discussion. Most people will not impose themselves upon the mom and pops. That's understood. It's the fringe elements that this proposal here seeks to address. It's a good attempt for my Republican counterparts, but for other deficiencies, I will have to vote against this floor amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition, and I'll be brief.
Opposition, please proceed.
Thank you. This bill, while purporting to protect the rights of small businesses, actually undermines the civil rights of everybody else. It would allow a business to put a sign in a window saying, essentially, no gays allowed. It codifies discrimination, which is something that we do not here in Hawaii especially condone. And I want to point out that no other state has taken a position like this. No other state has taken such an extraordinary step to open up this sort of law. And furthermore, under the underlying bill right now, nothing changes with the passage of marriage equality. Nothing changes from the perspective of a small business owner because right now, discrimination based on sexual orientation is already prohibited by law. So with that, I thank you very much and ask to insert written comments.
Thank you. So ordered.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Fale.
The previous speaker, it would be great if his remarks were true.
Representative Fale, in support or in opposition of the floor amendment?
In support of the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed
And I
in support.
sure wish I had the opportunity to share what he just said with my community. He says SB1 HD1 covers everything that we need. And that
Representative Pale, I don't think he said that. He was
okay.
he focused his comments
Okay, he
on
says,
the amendment.
Oh,
The
okay.
amendment
He says
before
that
us.
the amendment will codify discrimination, and that we do need to make sure that we compel people to do certain things. Mr. Speaker, in this country, we've never forced people to support religious ceremonies, and marriage is one of those ceremonies. Never have. That would be forcing people to support a religious institution. Forcing businesses to support marriage ceremonies with which they fundamentally disagree is forcing them to support a religious ceremony, Mr. Speaker. That would be codifying discrimination. That would be something compelling of people to do that has never been allowed in this country before, Mr. Speaker. We have never forced people to support religious ceremonies, and we should never force businesses to support those religious ceremonies either, Mr. Speaker. And for those reasons, I believe that we are in a very good position to once again address this issue with this amendment and to not compel people to act against their conscience.
Thank you, Representative.
Mr.
Further
Speaker.
discussion,
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Saiki, followed by Representative Shiro.
I call for the question, but please allow the introducer to present his rebuttal. Thank you.
Before that, I'd like to recognize Representative Oshiro second time, then we'll Representative Marcus Oshiro, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Second time. I just noticed that the draft on page 22 does contain an
Mr.
important
Speaker, point
provision.
of order.
What's your point?
I did call for the question, but please permit the introducer to present rebuttal.
Recess.
Members of the House, please be seated.
Will the House come to order? Representative Oshiro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll try to rise up as quickly as possible. I have only a few more comments. But I want to draw the attention of the members to
Still in opposition, right?
Still in opposition, unless I
Please
can amend
proceed.
the floor amendment.
Please proceed.
Okay, page 22, lines 9 through 12, subsection C, subsection B. This section shall not apply if a party to the marriage or civil union is unable to obtain any similar goods or services or housings or lodging elsewhere without substantial hardship. And substantial hardship can be narrowed down to what might be the least restrictive alternative analysis. And that's why, again, I need to draw attention to the Sherbert v. Werner, 374 U.S. 398 163, where you have a mechanism of evaluating the hardships against the religious freedoms of the individuals in the business. So there's a safety valve there. For example, if there is a florist or a photographer or wedding planner out in Naalehu on the Big Island, or maybe in South Point, in Kilauea on Kauai, or even in the cool EVs of Waianae and Maili, and they're the only shop in town. You can't get to it. Well, I think it's going to bend towards that situation without any kind of question, because there is a substantial hardship on that individual or that couple to receive these services. So there's a safety valve there to prevent some unintended consequences, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to point that out and let the members know that that's in this draft. But for the other reasons, I will oppose this floor amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Ward. Second time.
Thank you, Speaker, and with much appreciation to the majority floor leader for this opportunity. Speaker, I think the remarks of the czars who are going to implement this bill, SB1, i.e. the AG and the Civil Rights Commission, I think their comments, because of the lack of certainty as to how these things will be other than taken to court, offers really no assurance or protections. So I think what we've got to do, we've got to look at the half a loaf. And I know as legislators who always talk about half a loaf is better than not, because right now it looks more like we're creating conflict than sharing and putting ourselves on a two-way street. I think that's going to be dangerous. I think the divisiveness is going to have to be where we got to accommodate, as I said earlier, we got to make peace. And to entirely forget that community, the faith community that's business and professional, Mr. Speaker, is a big oversight. So it's going to come back. We don't want to do this in the courts. We are the legislators. If you remember what Judge Oahu said, poor legislation creates much litigation. And he said as a judge, I can't believe who wrote these laws. And this is his 10, 15 years on the bench. When we do loosey-goosey legislation, we're just simply saying, go to the mattresses in courts. That's where we should not be sending our people. We should be sending them to a mutual understanding. We should be sending them to the whole sense of what we are as an aloha and ohana. Granted, we don't have 15 states putting any of this in, but Mr. Speaker, we are exceptional. This is Hawaii, this is ohana, this is aloha. We can do it. I mean, we've got a lot of good legal brains in this place. We can craft something that doesn't take advantage of either community, but somehow allows the continuation of faith and the continuation of equal rights side by side. Because if they don't exist, that's not America. America is all about what we do, and we have a self-calibrating, a self-correcting constitution. We have laws, we have representatives who can calibrate this and make it work. The great pragmatism of America and why we are here today is because when something didn't work, we fixed it. Speaker, we can fix this. This is one example of what we can do. And if we don't do it today, we've got to do it another day. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker,
Representative Saiki.
call for the question.
Question has been called. Members.
Mr.
we're gonna
Speaker.
go to
Mr. Speaker, may I please be recognized?
Yes, actually, after Representative Har, members, I will recognize you if you would like to submit written comments in support or in opposition of this measure. Representative Har.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be brief. Mr. Speaker, in opposition to the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Point of what statement?
I called for the question. Please allow members to submit written comments. Thank you.
Representative Har, actually, Majority Leader is correct.
Okay. So, Mr. Speaker, if I may please have the words of the speaker from Wahua entered into the journal as if they were my own, and may I please ask permission to enter written comments into the journal.
So ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you for your understanding. Members, anyone, Representative Fukumoto.
Hi, Mr. Speaker. Thanks. I actually have a point of parliamentary inquiry. I think there's some confusion on the floor as to which rules we're following and which rules we are not following. And I just thought for the sake of transparency and maybe for the edification of the members and the public, if we could get an outline of which rules were necessary to suspend when we started this debate, I think it might be helpful for everybody that's watching.
Yes, we're following the House rules and the rules of Masons.
And we've suspended them, Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of this. So if we could get an explanation of which rules were suspended, I think that might be helpful for us. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, can we have a recess?
Recess. Will the House come to order? Members, before this voice vote, are there any other members wishing to submit written testimony? Representative Lowen.
Thank you. In opposition, permission to insert written comments.
So ordered. Thank you very much, Representative Oshiro.
Permission to submit written comments, please.
So ordered. Further, members, Representative Ng.
In opposition, with permission to insert written comments.
So ordered. Thank you very much. Any further requests for submission of written comments in support or in opposition? Thank you, members. If there are no other requests, we're going to go to a voice vote. Members, if you vote aye, members, by voting aye, you are in favor of the floor amendment. If you vote no, you are in opposition of the floor amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed say no. The floor amendment has failed. Representative Ward.
Mr. Speaker, I have a third and final amendment, please.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Clerk, have copies of floor amendment number 17 been distributed to the members?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, copies of floor amendment number 17 have been distributed.
Thank you very much. Representative Ward for the motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move for the Church Protection Act amendment. Thank you.
Amendment number 17. Thank you, Representative McDermott. Second?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I second the motion.
Thank you very much. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the proposed floor amendment number 17? Representative Ward.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise in support of this measure for a couple of reasons.
In support of the amendment, please
In
proceed.
support of the amendment. First is because of the lack of clarity that our Chief Legal Officer, the AG, Mr. Louis, it was where we are very much protected by this particular bill. Then on the other hand, we're not protected by the bill. The same with Mr. Hoshijo. We are very much protected, but we're not protected. And because of those ambiguities, I thought, let's lock this down. Let's carve out the churches from the Public Accommodations Act. And that's exactly what this amendment does. It sets aside and says, off limits, you churches, you go about doing what you're going to do. Because what we've got now, Mr. Speaker, is if you're going to do a baptism, a burial, a counseling, a basketball game, or whatever, you're not going to be able to be protected. It says only in marriages, solemnization, and in celebration. And every time I bring this up, people say, well, that's covered under the First Amendment. Well, duh, this whole thing is under the First Amendment, but we're carving it out and not being specific enough. So this amendment is saying, let's be very clear on what we're saying. Let's mean what we say what we mean. Carve out the churches, let them carry on with their First Amendment rights by protecting them, by opting them out, i.e. carving them out of the public accommodations law. That's all this amendment does, Speaker. Let there be peace in the religious community, in the LGBT community, and let them carry on as members of our ohana. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Oshiro.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak against this floor amendment.
In opposition, please proceed.
Yeah, on page 22, I think that's where the language is. Public accommodations do not include the real property, buildings, or other areas owned or leased by a religious organization and regularly used for religious purposes, notwithstanding whether the religious organization permits a community to also use some or all of this real property, building, or other areas owned or leased by a religious organization. I know what the intention is of the author and the proposer of this floor amendment, but I think this goes to the other extreme now, Mr. Speaker. This goes to the other extreme by having the religious organizations having no oversight into going into what might be considered a public accommodation under our current civil rights laws and the public accommodations law administered by the Civil Rights Commission. So I think that's where I have some problems with it. If I reference the jurisdiction of it right now, and I go to the outline that was given by us to the body by the Executive Director, Hawaii Civil Rights Commission, October 17, 2013, he talks about an analysis methodology. The first question is this a place of public accommodation? The religious facility is being offered for public use. And he looks at it as a fact-based, case-by-case determination. And I think what you would have here, if you had this language in place of the current language, where you have a analysis and maybe balancing of competing or seemingly competing constitutional issues, you would tend to maybe go over on one side, which would be to, in this case, start and end with public accommodations not being even covered under this section. It's similar to what would be like a private club right now, whether it's a Kiwanis Club or Elks Club or Pacific Club or Rigger Canoe Club, members kind of organization that is not covered under the public accommodations law. But I think most religious institution organizations operate in the public domain. They want to have that public intercourse of people coming in and out, but not only members, but non-members. They want to open their doors to those who they might be able to convert or expose to their way of thinking, their practices, their precepts. So I think this tries to address the situation, but again, I think it goes a little bit too far on that sense, Mr. Speaker. So that's where I have my concerns. I think we need to get back to, what we're trying to do here is to reconcile the competing interests of religious freedom within the institution, within the physical plan of the religious organization, with the same thing about the due process, equal protection rights of those who might want to enter or use those facilities in the domain of making sure that our constitutional rights of protection of civil rights, regardless of one's sex or race, gender orientation, religion, and ancestry is protected. So I think this goes a little bit too far, and for that reason, I would be objecting to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, members? Representative Har.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In opposition to the floor amendment.
Opposition, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, may I please have the words of the Speaker from Wahiwa entered into the journal as if they were my own.
So ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, I think, what this floor amendment does or is attempting to do really does, in fact, highlight the issues with the underlying measure. Again, what we are attempting to do is balance 14th Amendment equal protection versus First Amendment guarantees. And that's really the crux of this issue, Mr. Speaker, and why we are debating this. Because at the end of the day, they are both interests that must be equally weighed. And so while I certainly understand the introducer's intent, but I think what it really does is underscore and highlight the fact that the underlying measure does not, in fact, it doesn't achieve the objective of balancing those 14th Amendment and First Amendment rights. And that's why we're in this predicament right now. We understand. I, in fact, received an email from a woman who is a wedding photographer. She said she's already being targeted because she was in opposition to Senate Bill 1. Her business is already being targeted. We're already starting to see it now, Mr. Speaker. And so, again, as our job as legislators, our job is to ensure that everything that we craft is responsible and that we take everything into consideration. We balance. That's our job. And I would submit, Mr. Speaker, that if any law that we pass goes before the judiciary for judicial review and in fact is overturned, I would submit, Mr. Speaker, that we have failed as legislators because we did not perform our due diligence. So I've urged other members of this body that we have to take pause and look at what are we doing right now. And so I very much respect some of the comments about Chapter 489. The fact of the matter is it does create conflict. And so I think that this floor amendment, again, continues to underscore the deficiencies in Senate Bill 1 and why we continue to have these issues now and moving forward should this bill pass as is. For those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I am in opposition to the floor amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Nishimoto.
I call for the question.
Question has been called. Members, if you are in support or opposition and would like to submit written comments, please let the chair know now before we take the voice vote. Members? Okay. We're going to head to the voice vote. This is on floor amendment number 17. Members who vote aye, you will indicate that has the indication that you are in support of the floor amendment. Members, if you vote no, you are in opposition of the floor amendment. Okay? Voice vote. All those in favor for the floor amendment number 17 signify by saying aye. All those opposed say no. No. The floor amendment has failed. Members, recess, subject to the call of the chair. Recess.
Majority members will have a caucus at 1:45 in the caucus room. 1:45 in the caucus room. Thank you.